Oscar goes to Ron Howard.
I love all kinds of movies, all kinds of stories, really, and I always have, and that's taken me on some fantastic. Andy, every once in a while, Aaron would come down to the set and...
On one of America's most beloved sitcoms, The Andy Griffith Show, audiences fell head over heels for the warm, motherly Aunt Bee. But for a young Ron Howard, who played Opie, the woman behind the character was a source of on-set tension he'd never forget. What was the secret feud brewing just behind the smiles in Mayberry? And how did this chilly relationship accidentally shape the future of one of Hollywood's greatest directors? This is the untold story of the coldness that was a world away from a warm, public persona. There are places in pop culture that feel less like TV shows and more like memories. They're comfortable, familiar, and bathed in the warm glow of nostalgia. For millions, the capital of this comforting world is a small town in North Carolina that never really existed, but feels more real than anywhere else. Mayberry. From 1960 to 1968, The Andy Griffith Show wasn't just a sitcom. It was a weekly escape to a place of simple virtues and gentle humor. It was a refuge from the chaos of the era, a time of war and social upheaval. In Mayberry, the biggest problems were solved with common sense and a lot of heart, usually by the town's calm, wise sheriff, Andy Taylor. The show was a cultural phenomenon, a televised moral compass for a generation. At the heart of it all was the Taylor family, Sheriff Andy, his son Opie, and the woman who held their home together, Aunt Bee. As Beatrice Taylor, actress Frances Bavier became the perfect matriarch for an entire nation. She was the loving aunt, the prize-winning cook, and the gentle hand that soothed every trouble. But what happens when that illusion shatters? For Ron Howard, the little boy playing Opie, the gap between the beloved Aunt Bee and the actress who played her would become a difficult lesson. This is the story of what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling, a story of a feud that simmered just beneath the surface of America's favorite small town. To really get the friction that happened off-screen, you have to appreciate the perfection of the on-screen fantasy. Mayberry wasn't just a setting, it was a character. It represented a perfect vision of American community, where goodwill always won out. The show, guided by Andy Griffith himself, deliberately avoided the major political issues of the 1960s. It was a world purposefully insulated from the storms raging outside, offering viewers a half-hour of peace. The show's rhythm was simple. Every episode taught a quiet lesson about honesty, community, and respect. The relationship between Andy and Opie was the main event, a masterclass in patient parenting that reinforced family values. Andy Taylor wasn't the bumbling dad common in other sitcoms. He was smart, responsible, and caring, guiding his son with wisdom and a gentle touch. This wholesome image was carefully crafted. Clint Howard, Ron's younger brother, recalled how Andy Griffith was fiercely protective of this spirit. The set was often a fun place, with Griffith playing guitar and the cast pulling light-hearted pranks. But it was still a highly professional environment. In the early days, even the crew wore shirts and ties, showing just how seriously they took their work. They knew they were making something special. The show's success was staggering. It ended its final season in 1968 as the #1 rated show in America, a feat only matched by giants like I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. The fictional town felt so real that Andy Griffith's actual hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina, has marketed itself as the real-life Mayberry for decades. This was the world audiences fell in love with, a perfect, sun-drenched portrait of American life. And it made the reality behind the scenes all the more shocking. Before he was an Oscar-winning director, Ron Howard was just Ronnie, a freckle-faced kid with an almost unbelievable talent for acting. Born into a showbiz family, Ron grew up on sound stages. His father, Rance, was a constant presence on the Andy Griffith set, acting as both a dad and a coach, helping his young son learn lines and handle the pressure. Ron's portrayal of Opie, Taylor was a key ingredient to the show's success. He didn't play Opie as a wise-cracking sitcom kid. but as a sincere, curious, and respectful boy. This choice made the father-son dynamic feel incredibly real and became the emotional core of the series. The bond between Andy Griffith and Ron Howard on-screen mirrored their real life. Griffith became a mentor and father figure to the young actor, creating a warm, supportive environment where Howard could thrive. They developed a deep and lasting friendship that was obvious in every scene they shared. Even at 6 years old, Howard was a total pro. He hit his marks, knew his lines, and delivered them with a naturalism that was astonishing for his age. He was a beloved figure on set, part of the hijinks and easy camaraderie that included Griffith and Don Knotts. This world of warmth, professionalism, and friendship taught Howard what a great collaborative set should feel like. It was a standard of kindness that made his interactions with another key cast member feel all the more jarring and confusing. Long before she was America's favorite aunt, Frances Bavier was a highly trained, deeply serious actress with roots planted firmly in the theater. Born in New York City in 1902, she graduated from the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1925 and built a long, respectable career on the Broadway stage. She appeared in hit plays like On Borrowed Time and even shared the stage with Henry Fonda. This wasn't the background of a typical sitcom actor. This was the pedigree of a dramatic artist who took her craft very, very seriously. Bavier was a product of the New York theater scene, a world far removed from the relaxed, folksy vibe of Mayberry. Her move to film and television in the 1950s saw her play all sorts of roles, including a spot in the sci-fi classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, and even a turn as a villain on The Lone Ranger. When the role of Aunt Bee came along, it was both a blessing and a curse. She had a love-hate relationship with the character for the rest of her life. On one hand, it brought her national fame and an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Supporting Comedy Actress in 1967. On the other, she felt the role was beneath her dramatic talents and hated being so completely typecast. In a 1966 interview, Bavier complained about the difficulty of being Aunt Bee, saying, "It's terribly difficult, because Aunt Bee is so much nicer than the real me." This inner conflict, the clash between her pride as a serious actress and her fame in a role she didn't fully respect, was the key to her on-set personality. In her own eyes, she was a sophisticated artist from New York who found herself stuck in television, a medium she saw as a step down. This created a huge gap between her and the rest of the cast, and it was a gap most acutely felt by the youngest member of the cast. Behind the perfect facade of the Taylor household, the tension was thick, and it almost all centered around Frances Bavier. While the rest of the cast, led by Andy Griffith, had a relaxed, fun-loving vibe, Bavier remained a figure apart. She was described as remote, aloof, and intensely private. She rarely socialized with her co-stars and didn't join in on the pranks and sing-alongs that were a staple of the set. Ron Howard himself would later say, "I don't think she ever felt a part of what these boys were up to. Her seriousness often came across as rigid. She approached her work with a formal professionalism that clashed with the easygoing nature of her colleagues." Andy Griffith thrived on spontaneity, while Bavier, the stage actress, needed everything to be meticulously prepared and by the book. This difference was a constant source of friction. The crew quickly learned to handle her with care. Howard Morris, who played Ernest T. Bass and directed several episodes, famously said directing Bavier was like stepping on a landmine. A simple request to move a few inches for the camera could cause her to blow a fuse and refuse. Bavier was known to be easily offended, and her prickly personality kept her colleagues at a distance. She seemed to resent her role's limitations, once complaining that she always had to take a back seat and watch others get the laughs. This emotional turmoil manifested as a cool detachment that most people on set found impossible to break through. She was there to do a job, and that job did not include making friends. For young Ron Howard, who was just trying to make sense of the world, the contrast was stark and unsettling. He had to pretend to love Aunt Bee on camera, but in real life, the interactions were cold and uncomfortable. For a kid, the world is pretty simple. There is kindness, and there is the lack of it. On the Andy Griffith Show set, young Ron Howard experienced both extremes. His relationship with Andy Griffith was one of genuine warmth, but his interactions with Frances Bavier were another thing entirely. Decades later, Howard would talk about it with carefully chosen words, but you could still sense the underlying hurt. He described Bavier as prickly, reserved, and distant. Even as a boy, he could tell she didn't particularly like him. Imagine being a child on that set. You see the man who plays your pa, and his face lights up with a real smile. Then, you turn to the woman who plays your loving Aunt B, and her expression is just a mask of cool indifference. She didn't offer the hugs or kind words a real aunt might. Instead, she was cold, making a little boy feel like he was a bother. In interviews, Howard recalled being intimidated by her demeanor. He had to act out scenes of deep family love with an adult who, by his account, made him feel scared and uncomfortable every single day. Now, the story isn't completely one-sided. Ron's father, Rance, once remembered Bavier as being terrific, saying she loved Ron and even brought him Christmas gifts. This suggests a more complicated dynamic. It's possible that what an adult like Rance saw as professional reserve, a child like Ron experienced as personal rejection. But the lasting impression on Howard is undeniable. The chilliness he felt from Bavier was one of his first and most formative experiences with the difference between a public image and a private reality. It was a tough lesson in how to work professionally with people who might not be warm or welcoming. While there were no big, explosive fights between them, the story is one of a quiet, persistent coldness that a young boy had to navigate day in and day out. The friction wasn't just a case of an older actress disliking a child actor. Frances, Bavier's difficult reputation extended to many of the adults on set, especially the star of the show himself, Andy Griffith. Their personalities were like oil and water. Griffith was relaxed and loved a good prank. Bavier was rigid, serious, and had no patience for what she considered unprofessional behavior. This fundamental clash created a constant tension that was an open secret on set. For years, they coexisted in a state of professional frostiness, staying away from each other unless a scene required them to be together. The two leads, who played a close-knit nephew and aunt on screen, could barely stand to be in the same room off-camera. Bavier's most infamous conflict, however, was with George Goober Lindsay. In his memoir, Lindsay recounted something that happened on the set of the spin-off, Mayberry RFD. During a break, Lindsay was joking around and, by his own admission, using some foul language. Bavier, who apparently hated cursing, didn't just give him a dirty look. She marched over, scolded him, and then started hitting him on the head with her umbrella. Everyone was shocked. Lindsay admitted that he never forgave her for the humiliating confrontation. These stories paint a picture of a woman who was deeply unhappy and isolated in the very place that made her a star. It shows that Ron Howard wasn't the only target of her difficult behavior, but one of many who felt the chill of her personality. Her issues weren't with one person, but with the entire world of Mayberry itself, a world she could never bring herself to embrace. When the world of Mayberry finally came to an end, the actors went their separate ways. Ron Howard, the child, star, transitioned seamlessly into becoming one of Hollywood's most respected directors. The lessons he learned on that set, both good and bad, shaped his entire approach to filmmaking. Remembering how intimidating it was to work with Bavier, he made it a rule to always create a kind and respectful environment on his own sets, especially for young actors. He never wanted any child to feel the way he had. Frances Bavier's life took a very different path. In 1972, she retired from acting completely. She left Hollywood and moved to Siler City, North Carolina, a real-life small town that had often been mentioned in the show's scripts. She said she fell in love with North Carolina, all the pretty roads and the trees. It seemed she was trying to find the real-world version of the community she represented on screen, but never felt a part of. Her retirement, however, wasn't the peaceful dream you might imagine. She became more and more reclusive. The fame she'd gained as Aunt B followed her, and she found it suffocating. Neighbors would peer through her windows and school buses full of kids would stop outside hoping to see Aunt B. They expected the warm character she played, a role she'd grown to despise. All this public attention just drove her further into isolation. She lived a quiet, sparse life, rarely leaving her house, with her 14 cats as her main companions. The gulf between her and her former castmates remained. She refused to be in the 1986 reunion movie, Return to Mayberry. That same year, Andy Griffith and Ron Howard tried to visit her at her Siler City home. In a sad and telling moment, Bavier refused to let them in, speaking to them for only a moment through her closed door. The rejection was a stark symbol of the distance she had always kept. She had physically moved to Mayberry's heartland, but she never truly let its people in. For over 20 years, the chilly silence between Frances Bavier and Andy Griffith continued. They had created one of TV's most beloved families, but they had never become friends. Then, as Bavier's life was coming to an end, there was an unexpected final act to their story. Just 4 months before she passed away in 1989, a frail Frances Bavier picked up the phone and called Andy Griffith. In what must have been a very difficult conversation, she apologized for being so difficult during the show. Griffith later recounted the call on Larry King Live. Bavier reportedly told him, "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault." It was a moment of incredible closure, a last-minute attempt to mend a broken relationship and maybe find some peace. Bavier died on December 6, 1989, at the age of 86. Her legacy is as complicated as she was. On her headstone, the inscription includes the name of her most famous role, Aunt B, a final nod to the character that defined her. In her will, she left a $100,000 trust fund for the Siler City Police Department, which provides a Christmas bonus to the staff to this day, a final generous act for her adopted hometown. Ron Howard's legacy, of course, is one of huge cinematic achievement. But the memory of his time with Frances Bavier has stayed with him. He learned a powerful lesson about the difference between who people are in public and who they are in private. The icy demeanor of the woman who played Aunt B didn't make him bitter. It made him better. It taught him empathy and gave him a blueprint for how not to run a creative project, making sure his own sets would be the kind of warm, collaborative places that Mayberry only ever was on screen. The story of Ron Howard and Frances Bavier is a powerful reminder that the lives of our favorite stars are often far more complex than we imagine. What are some of your favorite memories of The Andy Griffith Show? And does learning about the reality behind the scenes change how you see the classic series? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age. The world of Mayberry remains a cherished piece of American culture, a testament to our deep-seated yearning for a simpler, kinder world. For 8 seasons, The Andy Griffith Show gave us that world, and at its center were the unforgettable characters of Opie and Aunt B. But the story of Ron Howard and Frances Bavier reminds us that even in the most perfect settings, human conflict endures. Bavier was a talented actress trapped in a role that brought her fame but not fulfillment, leading to a life marked by isolation and a coldness that left a lasting mark on her young co-star. Ron Howard, in turn, carried that tough childhood lesson, with him turning it into a guiding principle for his own career, one built on the very warmth that was missing from his relationship with her. The final apology from Bavier to Griffith offers a bittersweet ending, a moment of grace that suggests that even she, in the end, understood the magic they had all created, and perhaps regretted not letting herself be a bigger part of it. The feud in Mayberry reveals a simple truth. The people behind our most beloved illusions are just that, people with all their flaws, insecurities, and contradictions.